If any of you put a stumbling block before one of these little ones who believe in me, it would be better if a great millstone was hung around your neck and you were thrown into the sea. Wow. Let there be no mistake. These words of Jesus, as recounted in the Gospel of Mark, they're meant to sting. They really should unsettle all of us, and perhaps those of us who are parents more especially. A little girl named Phyllis Webstad was given an orange shirt by her grandmother for her very first day of school at St. Joseph's Mission Residential School in British Columbia. When Phyllis got to school, however, her clothes were taken away, including her new orange shirt, and it was never returned. Some time ago, Phyllis told CBC News that the color orange has always reminded her of her experiences in residential school. She related how my feelings didn't matter, how no one cared, and I felt like I was worth nothing. All of us little children were crying and no one cared. So this week we celebrate how one strong Indigenous woman started a movement to convey her message that every child matters, every day. Phyllis started the Orange Shirt Day to educate people about residential schools and to fight bullying and racism. And Parliament this year mandated September 30th for the first time as the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. This is one way, 6 years after this was recommended by the Commission for Truth and Reconciliation in their call to action number 80, this is one way that our country will respond by marking Thursday as a federal statutory holiday. So how do you plan to celebrate this occasion? How might Canadian Christians mark this occasion? The Oblates have invited all members of that religious order and all who worship in Oblate parishes to consider how we might best mark this day as individuals, in our various ministries, in our communities, and in our families. One example comes from the Galilee Center in nearby Arnprior, where they're hosting a self-guided meditation walk on the grounds entitled Language of the Land, which will feature Indigenous teachings. And on Thursday, they'll host the blanket exercise, a moving educational experience which this parish has offered several times in the past. My partner Suzanne and I will join our former pastor Richard Badet in a 2-hour pilgrimage of sorts, organized by Indigenous organizations to commemorate the children who went to residential schools and help us relearn history from their perspective this time. Importantly, many school boards are organizing special educational events for our kids this week as well. You know, so many of us were shocked at the end of May when ground-penetrating radar allowed disclosures of unmarked graves containing remains of Indigenous children to be found near residential schools. The disclosures unleashed a torrent of public condemnation of the federal government, as well as the 4 Christian churches which ran the schools. And Catholics administered more than 60% of the schools, and the Oblates ran 48 schools, including the schools where unmarked graves were found near Kamloops, BC, and Cowessess, Saskatchewan. More disclosures of unmarked graves of children at other school sites are surely to be discovered. But these disclosures are not new. They confirm, rather, the memories of residential school survivors who gave testimony to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Former students and parents of former students spoke of the children who went to school but never returned. The tragedy of the loss of children was compounded by the fact that their burial places were often distant and even unknown. So the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's Missing Children and Unmarked Burials report was 266 pages long. They undertook a systematic effort to record and analyze the deaths at the residential schools and the presence and the condition of the student cemeteries. The Commission identified at that time, 5 years ago, 3,200 deaths. But for just under 1/3 of those deaths, the government and the schools didn't record the names of the children who died. For just under 1/2 of those 3,200 kids, the government and the schools didn't record the cause of the death. Now this year also marks the 30th anniversary of the Oblate Apology. This is still a very relevant and important document, a guide for our reconciliation efforts today. At the time, the Oblates used revealing language. They apologized not only for their role in administering the schools, but also, quote, for the part we played in the cultural, ethnic, linguistic, and religious imperialism of the time. Further, the Oblates apologized for, in their words, the very existence of the schools themselves. In other words, Oblates apologized for the personal sins of those members who committed abuse, but also they repented for the structural sin that the residential school system represented. So a fine way to mark this Thursday's National Day for Truth and Reconciliation would be for all of us to spend some time meditating on that Oblate apology. And we've probably all heard that call to action number 58 from the TRC called for the Pope to come to Canada and apologize for the schools. Not only has the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops not invited the Pope to do this, but the conference itself has not issued an apology. This has led tens of thousands of Canadians to communicate with their bishops, highlighting the need for an apology to be made. The Oblates have said it would be a great grace for the Church in Canada were Francis to come and offer such an apology. I wonder if more of us will take up this call. Well, we know we all need to do more than apologize, of course. You'll be glad to know that your parish council members and others have been discerning how we at St. Joe's can respond more fully. Some Catholics may be more inclined to respond with denial or defensiveness or even impatience. Media reports can become the targets of our ire. Some bishops have even suggested that it's the church that is being persecuted. But I think we all need to recognize what should be obvious. In the first place, this is not about us. It's all about the children. It's all about the systems that continue to oppress Indigenous people today. Some time ago, Pope Francis reflected on the same difficult readings that we heard today. That story where the apostles wanted Jesus to chastise someone who is doing good works, but he wasn't part of their group. Francis said, John and the other disciples displayed a closed attitude when faced with a circumstance that didn't fit with their program. In this case, the action, albeit good, of a person who was outside the circle of followers. Jesus, on the other hand, appears very free, fully open to the Spirit of God, whose actions are not limited by confines or boundaries. Jesus wants to educate his disciples and us today on this inner freedom. So this week, the gospel invites us in Canada to recognize that God didn't arrive in the so-called New World the moment Columbus landed. Let's use this week to reflect on how we can be more spiritually attentive to the authenticity, the beauty, and the truth of the actions and beliefs of others. especially of Indigenous peoples. Maybe all of us Christians can agree to start from the premise that every child matters and build that new church and that new world that includes everyone.